I am going to proceed to share my screen. Well, hello everybody. So I'm starting the recording, and today I'm going to have a design share session where I'm going to look into exploring how we can make designing interactions better, or rather, how can we better communicate all the various parts that we as designers come up with when we are designing interactions. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Share screen. Okay. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Absolutely.
Right. And in my post, I advertised that all you really kind of need to get this going is a pen and paper. In real life, I would use a pen and paper. But since I have to do the screen share, I'm going to do a digital version of it, which involves me attempting to screen share my iPad. One moment. And the iPad's handy because then if you're doing this digitally, then you can kind of use this as a handoff mechanism for your team or anyone else that you need to communicate this stuff to. Great, cool. Can you see my iPad? Oh, geez. There we go. Hopefully you can see my iPad. So let's just run through a hypothetical scenario where we are going to dissect and pretend that we are designing the wonderful Google search and handing it off to developers. So I've run into many scenarios where the screenshots or whatever it is, mockups, even though they may be super high fidelity, or they may be rigged up with various kind of prototyping-like workflows. So some prototyping workflows you may get would be from applications like Figma. Oh, this doesn't, I wanted to go to their site. But Figma, you can like click through things, you can kind of see how it flows, which is fine. It's great, it's better than nothing. But in, let's say, my hypothetical scenario, I have maybe a collection of 5 screenshots here, which I've taken before. So say this is the initial kind of blank screen, the user hasn't typed anything yet. Oh, cool. So I type in the word WordPress and then I see this drop down appear with some pre-filled information. Cool. If I hover my mouse over this thing, we get some sort of, hey Sean, we get some sort of like hover area showing that, oh, this is something that the user is hovering into. Cool. And if I hover into this clear little X icon, we can see that there's a tooltip. And for certain kind of data, we may show alternate information. For example, companies like West Elm, Winners, or Walmart will show those with an accompanying logo. And also for Google search, I believe it'll show like countries. So if you do Canada, it probably will show the Canadian flag. Yeah, there we go. And some additional meta information down there. Right. So this collection of 5 screenshots is, for better or for worse, a lot more information than some kind of design to dev handoffs that I've experienced. Sometimes it's literally just this and this. So without any kind of explanation or information, me as a developer, I have to try my best to infer all the things that are going on here. So I have to assume that this is probably some sort of drop-down thing, all right, which has drop-down mechanics. So probably keyboard, up-downs, pressing escape, pressing tab to jump to things, maybe. And then in addition to that, as me as a developer, I have to also think through how it is I'm supposed to fetch certain information to display some things here. Why are certain things bold? I don't know. So us as designers, in addition to providing these screenshots and also kind of our information explanation, we also should, in some form, create little maps to describe how do you get from here to here, all the interactions that happen, like clicking something, pressing arrows, or whatever the case may be. And that's kind of what I'm going to try to demonstrate today. But before I do, I'm going to show you folks one thing that I feel like is quite interesting. Facebook Origami. So jumping out of the web world for a second, within the world of game design, they do have kind of GUI tools that allow you to communicate these things or build these things in a kind of like visual way. I know, for example, inside of Unity, you you may not need to know how to code everything, but as a kind of visual kind of builder, you're able to like stitch together parts or ideas of like states so that your character, let's pretend you're building a little character, your character has different states and then you can transition to different states. So like, oh, I'm just idling. Oh, now I got now my character has to jump. Now my character has to walk. And then you're kind of stitching together those ideas in this kind of visual way. The screenshot I'm showing now is from the tool by Facebook called Origami. This is their kind of prototyping, sketchy, Figma-y kind of tool. And they have some sort of visual builder in this way. So what we're trying to do is and this is really good because it communicates all the various kind of interactions that you need to get from point A to B. And unless you have some sort of, design spec that is the textual version of this, all of this information gets lost during the design to dev handoff and is then inferred by the developer. And the quality of the output is then kind of based on how good the developer is in inferring that information and how good the communication is back and forth between the dev and the designer when trying to figure all this stuff out. Cool. So with that said, let us look at Google search. I'm going to share oh no, my iPad went to sleep. One moment. Oh, I got to do the screen sharing thing again. I have to connect my iPad. One moment. 1919. Okay, and we can do this in a very lo-fi way. And another reason why I'm not showcasing an application to do this is because I haven't found one that works. Paper and pen works fine for me. Gonna turn on some drawing guides so I can see some grids. And of course, you don't need to use this particular application or this particular iPad. I do this all the time on just using paper and pen, paper and marker to be specific, because I like writing things with markers. All right, can I draw stuff? No, wrong brush. There we go. Hopefully you can see that stroke. Okay, so we're going to walk through all of these various parts and see how we can stitch together the logic of how you jump between here to here. Okay, so I'm going to draw this real fast. Turn no stream, that way it can, yeah, it's a little bit faster. Okay, so let's pretend we have Google. Oh, shoot. Sorry, my iPad. There we go. Sorry. Let's pretend we have Google, and then we have the search box. Hopefully you can see that. And then we have another state where we have Google, the search box, and it's open. Like this one. And then we're typing in, we have nothing. So no words. And then we type in the word W or something. And then we have a caret here. So how do we jump from here to here? Also, I'm going to draw the little X and then the little voice, because Google Voice is a thing, or speech to text is a thing. So if I type in the letter, oh, hang on. Let me just check something. Google. If I have nothing. Okay, cool. If I have nothing, there's no X. That's an important detail. If I have nothing, there's no X. So the moment I type something, it transitions from here to here. Okay.
You're not sharing the iPad.
Sorry. I had to jump back and forth. So, okay. So the moment I type something, I can transition from there to there. How do I then transition back? I have to, I guess, clear it. Clear. And then now I can transition back to here. Okay. So that's one of the two states that we've kind of illustrated with this little diagram here. And the other thing that's really useful when you're coming up with these little diagrams is to give them names. So this one, the name could be start. This one, it could be open. Something, just something to kind of, so that we're aware of the labels. And then, now that we have this, we have to, there is the ability to, we can clear it in different ways, I'm guessing, right? And right now, I'm just going to do purely based on guessing. I'm not going to jump back into Google anymore. I think clicking this particular X button also clears it. So there's multiple ways of clearing. There's clicking on the X button, or if you're on your keyboard and you delete all the characters, you're clearing it. So there's multiple ways of clearing. It's press X or clear value. Okay. So we've identified those two ways. How can you press X? You can't see my hands, but when I'm doing these things and I'm writing this stuff on paper, what I actually do is I like imagine myself in this scenario and I'm pretending my finger is like the mouse. And then I go and I think, okay, how do I jump from here to here? Because right now our cursor is here and our focus is on the input. That means that we can, if we press tab, we're able to jump to this X. So let's just do tab from here, and then we jump to the X right there. Which, so by thinking through that, that means that this X that you're seeing is tabbable. Because sometimes you might have seen certain kind of combo boxy, autocomplete-y, searchy things where they display multiple elements inside, where some things are tabbable and some things are not. So based on this kind of decision that we've made, we have to say, oh, the user can tab into this. That way, if they tab into this, then they press enter. That's the way that they can clear it as well. We're not going to focus on the search element right now. We're just going to do this kind of interaction. Okay, so we've drawn that. And now let's focus on the next part, the listing. That's it.
Hey, Q.
Yep.
There's actually an interesting behavior. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it's good or bad, but when you do tab to that X, it actually closes the list of suggestions.
Yeah.
And while you have focus on the search, you can also hit escape to close the list of suggestions. I'm not entirely sure why any of that happens, but it is like this weird blurred state between.
Yeah, so those are that's the next part. That's a great observation. I'm glad you said something there, because I actually ran through this entire thing before this call, just so I had some practice. So what Sean had mentioned is that we have something very interesting where somehow if you tab into this, now I don't know, I have to kind of actually check. W, tab into that, no, okay. Yeah, so whoop. If we tab into that guy, that means we close it. Delete. Oh, come on. There we go. We tab into that guy, it closes, and a tooltip appears. So let's just draw that for tabbed, and then we'll just call the state tabbed, or rather focused X. So what does that mean? Based on, well, the initial Google design, it looks like if this search little field is blurred is a JavaScript event where something is no longer in focus. So if it's blurred, then close. So instead of saying focused X, I'm just going to say closed. Closed. So how do you close it? You blur the input. And now we get this. And you can blur the input, it looks like, in various ways. You can tab into something else. So you can tab forward, which will tab into this X, or you can tab backwards. So if I jump onto Google and I press Shift Tab, it goes somewhere else. I'm guessing onto my profile or something like that. So that means if you blur it, it also closes. And I think if you press Escape, it closes as well. So we have to write this down, Escape. If you press Escape, it also closes. So what's interesting is some of these behaviors, they are kind of expected for dropdowns. Some of them they're not. This one seems a little bit like 90% dropdown behavior, but then 10% custom. And without you kind of, and let's pretend the application you have right now already has dropdowns. So you without writing all this stuff out, you can do the developer, whoever that's implementing it, might just assume, oh, I'll just use the dropdown that we have existing, and it'll be fine. But that might not necessarily match the interactions that you have in mind for your design, because for reasons, this thing needs to behave a little bit differently. John, do you mind muting for a second? Sorry, your keyboard is clacking away there. Cool. Thank you. Alrighty, so we know how to jump to here to here. And now we have a bunch of items that we can see. Hang on. Let's say we're in our closed state. I'm just gonna exit out of here. How do we open it again? So I'm gonna move this around. How do we go from here back to here? Jumping back to my iPad. How do we go from the closed state to the open state? Well, I did this ahead of time, so don't need to jump around. How you can do that within the Google search is you basically press any key. So with the exception of escape, I think. So if you press up or down or any character, it'll pop it back open and it'll continue the typing. So this is basically the cycles, the state cycles that we have for the open and close mechanism for the Google search. There's probably a lot more, but I'm just going to stick with this for now. And if you were to do this in real life, you'll probably be a little bit tidier than what I have, just because I like drawing on the iPad, but it's not as tidy as how I can write in real life. So here's the other interactions I think that are pretty important. So let's say I'm just typing the word WordPress. If I press down, we can see that it can cycle through, right? We have all these items that it can cycle through. But if I'm at the very, very end, for this particular dropdown, it actually cycles back up. But it doesn't cycle back up to the first item like most typical dropdowns do. It actually cycles back into the search area. And the actual text is, I gotta give a different, there we go. The actual text, so you see here, this one's RE, right? Because that's the term I've written. If I do down, 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 we can see that it's autofilling based on the thing that I am highlighting over. But the moment I jump back into the search input, you see that's reset back to my original query. It's not, it doesn't jump to like restaurants near me or anything like that. So that means that the search has to like keep that in memory somehow. Like it has to remember that, oh, RE is the original thing. And then as you tab through all this stuff, then show the thing that you're tabbing into, or sorry, not tabbing, arrowing down, because tabbing would close this thing. So if I'm pressing up and down, it'll show the thing that I'm selecting. But the moment that it cycles back and goes back into the search area, show the original query. So we have to, whoops, let's write that down. So let's say we have our search and it's open. Let's say it's R, just so it's faster. R, and then we have a little close guy, and then we have all these guys, and then the first one is round, the other one is routine. I'm just writing random words. And then let's duplicate this thing. Duplicate for the next state. Oh, dang it. There we go. Merge down. I so wish that there was a way for me to do this with marker and paper. It's fine. So when we hover over one of these things, let me just new layer. Let me just do that. Oh no, round. Let's hover over round. One moment. There we go. It's great. It's beautiful. So when we hover over it, then we have to indicate that there's a background color of some kind. So let's write the states for that. Hover. Oh, dang. Come on. Hover. Yep. Then we get that. But hovering, if I were to jump over to Google, you see that hovering doesn't autofill this guy, but going up and down does. So that's an important detail as well. And the other kind of very interesting interaction they have here is, notice that I'm hovering over, my mouse is over on the first one, and then my mouse is over to the last one. If I'm here and I press up and down, it starts from this first position. But if I move my mouse all the way here and I press up and down, it starts from that next position. So this little detail is important because not all drop-downs work this way. What I mean by that is, drop-downs could have kind of split kind of focusy states, if that makes sense. So let's say it'll remember from tab order, like if I'm pressing up and down with my keyboard arrows, it'll remember that it's at number 1. And it doesn't really matter where I move my mouse into in terms of hover. It'll continue to jump up and down with my keyboard movements from number 1. I'm going to jump into Bootstrap for a second. Bootstrap, drop-downs, drop-down, because I believe that's how Bootstrap drop-downs work. I may be wrong. It's been a while. So if I'm here, right. It's very, very light. Hopefully you can see this over Zoom. The color is super, super light. But my mouse right now is over the word action. And I'm going to press up and down on my keyboard. You notice that now hopefully you can see that there's 2. The up and down is right now on separated link. If I press up, it'll go to something else here. If I press down again, it's on separate link. So you can see that they're not connected. The mouse cannot adjust where the focus one is, and the focus one is not connected to the mouse at all. But in Google's case, they're connected, right? So if I move my mouse over here, it starts from there. So that is an important detail that really, really should be mentioned when you're creating this, when you're writing the kind of flow for this design here. Because if you don't do that, then the developer doesn't know that these different kind of states and interactions need to be managed together. And I'd argue that this kind of like merged experience with the mouse can dictate where the initial starting point for your up and downs. It's very, very important, and it's something that macOS has as well. So if I'm mousing over here, it'll start from there. If I'm mousing over here, it'll start from here as well. It's having built drop-downs, this interaction is very complicated to kind of come up to kind of actually code, but it's worth it for this particular experience. So that's something that we need to highlight. Oops. So we hover, we do that. Or if we press, let's see, I'm going to have to redraw this. R, round, routine, and I'm gonna mouse into this one. This is wonderful. This is great. Okay, so I'm gonna say down arrow from here gets us here. So now this one, you can see that there's a difference. If I'm hovering over the text area, it doesn't get auto-completed. But if I down arrow and select it, it does. And what happens, and we also have to cycle through as we down arrow. So let's say it cycles through. But at the very end, it has to somehow jump back into the initial state. So let's just do something like that. So as I continue to press down, it'll cycle through all of our items. But when it hits the last one, it needs to then jump back to the initial state, which we have right here, and it'll use the value it has in memory or it remembered our initial query. So we have to mark that down. I'm just checking my notes for a second. I think that's kind of it. Hang on, merge down. I'm gonna merge. One moment. Merge. Okay. So then we have this stuff detailed, like so. And again, if you're compiling this stuff to hand it off, hopefully it'll look a lot neater than mine. But all the things that we shared so far, those intricate notes, you can probably write them down in like a Google Doc or something as you're preparing this to hand off to your developer. Accompanying with like some illustrations I have accompanying that to kind of demonstrate like, oh, this is these are the cycles, and this is what you can do to interact with things to jump around. Because without this, right, like there's no way any of that can be really communicated just by looking at this. Even if you rig together like a Figma prototype, it doesn't it may not be as detailed in terms of like all the various actions that you can take with keyboard interactions or like certain key presses that you need to do to build all this stuff out. So let's say you have all of this already. There's probably a lot more with the Google stuff, but these are the kind of the main interactions that we have for the Google search. The other problem I've seen a lot with design to developer kind of handoff is the assumption that the tool is smart enough to give the developer all they need. And I don't blame anyone, because a lot of these modern tools these days, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. A lot of these modern tools, they market themselves and being like, oh, this is the only thing you need for design, product, and development. You create something using Figma or Zeppelin or one of the other tools, and there's like, we generate code for you or code data things for you. So you can just give this to your developer and it'll be fine. The challenge with that is a lot of the code that they auto-generate for you or provide for you, it's like random CSS values that the developer can't use anyway. It's like, great, I see a design you have that has unnamed layers with a font size of 13.5 with a random hex color for color. I don't know what any of this stuff means. So it's like that information is better than nothing, but barely better than nothing. So for us as designers, I'm going to share my screen again. We can do a little bit better in helping communicate that. And the easiest thing that you can do is within Figma, right? Instead of having, I'm gonna like pseudocode or just mock this out inside of my text editor. So instead of having groups in Figma that looks like this, one moment, group 1, and then like rectangle 47, and then text that with something like title, something like that. I don't know. So instead of having things like this, just name them like that. And the reason why this is super, super important, not just from a design perspective, because now you're naming things, you're thoughtfully naming things, you probably can symbolize them create components within Figma, organize them and all that. It better communicates to the developer what the various chunks of UI are. So this is one grouping of things, this may be another grouping of things, this may be another grouping of things, and you're giving them names. Because ultimately, the code that the developer writes in terms of like the UI, how it's constructed, what their names are, the relationships of all of them, the idea of that should more or less mirror whatever it is you have in design. So if in design, let's say you create something like, you name a layer, call it search bar, you have close, you have voice. Whoops, I took a screenshot. And then you have text area or search icon or whatever the case may be. By labeling things in that way, and when you're handing off to the developer, and the developer can see those layers, right? They can see, oh, this is the text area, this is the close, this is whatever. Then they can go ahead and build those UI components. Because if they don't, basically the equivalent, the developer or code equivalent of rectangle 47 and circle 52 or whatever the case may be within design, this is basically the code equivalent that you may have seen before. And then why are they just arbitrary divs that are just nested on each other with no names? Because naming is super hard. Why can't I just, for me as a developer, I can just do this and then give them, I don't know, a class name of search. And then I'll just use like maybe some CSS, or it's like search the second div of the thing. Let me now make that like a display of something else, display of inline block or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I mean, and one very, very simple way to do this as a designer preparing your assets to be shared is just to thoughtfully name your layers. That's it. So not only have you named your layers, instead of rectangle 47, you can call it like search bar. And name everything, by the way. So now if your Figma setup or your Sketch setup or whatever design tool you happen to be using, if you have symbols or pre-made presets like color presets or typography presets or whatever the case may be that are already named, right? So for the title, let's jump back into here. Let's say this whatever I'm showing right now in Sketch, which just Google search. For this title, let's say it's this text right here, this hello text. The other thing you have to that is very helpful to prepare for developers is to similar to how you would name your layers, name the values that they will be needing to build the UI. Values will include like font sizes or hex codes for colors or things like that. So instead of, let's say right now the text is, I'm just making things up. Let's say the color for that text is that within your Figma or your Sketch or whatever the case may be. Try to have this kind of symbolized or variabilized so that you maybe in your system, you have something as like default text color, right? And that maps ultimately underneath the hood, default text color will map to that. And why that's important is because when you're the developer building this UI, and let's say you're creating some sort of CSS or style or things like that, and you have color, like you don't want to write that in your code if you can help it. So as from the code side of things, if you've established something like a default text color variable or design token or whatever the case may be, you as a designer should reference that so that the developer can also use the same thing that they've set up on their side. So all the various components, especially reusable ones, values like colors, typography size. So here we can maybe have like font. The text size of this text size is, I don't know, body text size, not size, which maybe ultimately maps to 13 pixels, something like that. Then dev side, they can do something like this, font size, that. And that's how you can keep things consistent. Because if you don't have this, and on the design side, let's just say you have that and you have that. So now as a developer, and this is what you've given me, I have to, if I'm familiar with this, if I know what these raw values mean, I can of course then map or use the variable equivalent of that. If I don't know what they mean, then I'll just hard code these values because that's what I see. If this information is even available. So over time, this is how UI gets fragmented a lot, because values are not clearly or established values like colors, font size, and so on. They're not really clearly communicated. So then hard-coded values are then added in. The other process of how this can be manually tidied up is maybe the developer creates a pull request or something like, oh, I built this UI, these are my changes. The designer can step in and manually audit it and say, oh, no, we can't use this value. We have default text color that we use. So there could be a back and forth in trying to clean this up. And all of this could be avoided with if like these values were used here to begin with, something like that. Body, font size. The downside of this, though, at least from the Figma kind of side, is that it requires a steeper initial investment in creating all of this stuff. But I'd argue that it's worth it when your project gets to a certain size, because you're going to be needing these consistent values over and over again anyway. Like, you're probably going to have some sort of established color palette. You're probably going to have some sort of established type scale. So you're going to need these values anyway. So it's better to just like create those presets or components or whatever your design application uses for symbolizing or standardizing certain values, and just use those for references. And that if things on the dev side, if they don't have these values, then this could be something where design can influence dev and be like, hey, we're starting to establish certain colors or certain type sizes that we want to use throughout the UI. Maybe that's something that you can build on the dev side. And it's up to the devs to kind of figure out how it is they can do that with their given technology, because that can differ based on like what CSS framework they have or CSS compiler they have or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, the ideas for raw values, for consistent values like color, type size, and stuff, should be the same between design and development. The implementation is different, but the ideas for them are the same. Same with how you break apart your layers for, say, the Google search bar or this little X button or whatever the case may be, all these buttons. The fundamental idea of how those UIs work and their groupings and the relationships should be the same between what you have in Figma and what exists inside of code. It's just the implementation is different. The idea is the same, the medium just happens to be different. Designers work with pixels, developers work with code. And the closer you are of achieving that kind of like sameness in a way between the two, the more consistent your UI will be. And fragmentation exists because of inconsistencies, because of assumptions made either by designers of like, oh, I thought that the developer knew how my particular unique drop-down implementation works. And the developer thinking, oh, this looks vaguely sort of like this other gray I have, so I'll just use that. And a lot of this can be clarified by having additional, from the design side, having some additional supplementary text to accompany how your design kind of fits together in, say, a Google Doc or a Markdown file or whatever the case may be. Maybe having some, oh no, I lost my iPad. Come on. There really needs to be a better way for macOS to like natively support iPad screen mirroring. It's fine. So also to have supplementary kind of diagrams like this to show how states can transition between various parts within your UI, how interactions can work. And also, and finally, within your Figma file or whatever the case may be, using appropriate labels, thoughtfully grouping things, and also using consistent values for like color or typography or whatever the case may be. And another bonus of having this particular UI that you're seeing here for how states can flow between each other and so on, like the developer, if they're at least if you're working with React or something similar, this is kind of how they have to think about how to handle all that state. State management is very tricky when trying to build this stuff. And if you're familiar with frameworks like Redux or things that use kind of a reducer-like workflow, then this maps very, very well to that. So these guys, these like escape presses or blurs or closed or opens, like those could be particular states that you can have, and then also particular actions that you can take to transition between the various states you have. So like having something like this, especially if your developer is used to thinking in this way, it really helps them a lot. Otherwise, they kind of have to make it up on the end to try to figure out how all this stuff will happen. Of course, there's tons and tons of things that are going to be unknown as well that you cannot, like you absolutely cannot figure out just by doing this exercise or looking at these screenshots. And that mostly comes down to things that like, how do we handle touch inputs from like an iPad versus a desktop? Like you may not be able to figure that out based on this exercise. And those things are, you kind of have to kind of stumble along into when you're into that kind of like feedback prototypey phase. But hopefully those things will be easier to work out just because you've already kind of figured this part out. And yeah, that's kind of what I had to share today in regards to, oh great, my iPad turned off. It's fine. I'm gonna, geez, forget it, forget iPad. Yeah, so that's kind of what I had to share today in terms of like designing UI, developer to designer or designer to developer handoff. Any thoughts and questions from anybody? I said a lot, so. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm good. Hi, Q.
Hi. I'm so glad you're here, but I think you came in a little later, right?
Yeah. Consistency between components and design and code.
Yeah.
Sounds
You have any
good.
thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you went over this before, but the state man, like representing state man, states in sketches and like
Yeah.
Pentagon sketches makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And I'm wonder how you, I think doing that and practicing that, it takes like a lot of practice to understand how to like break up the different states. And I think I'm wondering if you have any tips on like how to break up components in your sketching process, other than just do it more.
Yeah, it comes down to doing it more, I think. So I'm going to share my screen. So I mentioned this earlier on in the call, in that other programs and other disciplines, they have tooling for this. So like this, for example, can you see this, Jeff? Like this is Facebook or Origami. And these are all, I think they're called swatches. And then you can link swatches together. But like every one of these little guys, they're sort of like interactions that you can do. And then you can see after you've achieved a certain value, then you can transition to the next one, which would then influence state or the UI in a certain way. So graphically, you can build this kind of stuff out in a very, very like smart kind of prototype that they have. Unfortunately, I think this is like mobile focused. This is very, very mobile. And you can't like draw shapes in it like the same way that you can Figma. So this is a very unique kind of use case. The other one is Unity State Machine. Yeah. So Unity, they have something like this as well, where graphically you can create like little states. Like imagine if you had a character and you had different states like idling, walking, jumping, and then you tie a particular animation for that character state. So if you're idling, you're just standing still, jumping, you would jump, right? And then based on a certain trigger, like if I press a certain button or keyboard thing, it would transition from idle to jump. And if I let go, it'll go from jump to idle. And you can build those things in a graphic way. And that then this is essentially the state machine creator thingy that they have in Unity. We don't have anything like that in the world of web. The closest thing that exists to that, which sorry, XState, I personally still find this quite difficult to work with, is XState, where you can see that there are certain states they have, and then there are ways to transition through them. But this is, when I'm seeing this, right, this is very, very close to one of those engineering, like, database flow chart things that I just can't get my mind around. I don't know why. My mind breaks when I look at those. This is very close to that, and I can't really understand it. I need to see, like, in a very simple form, just like UI and arrows pointing between things, and maybe descriptions saying how you get there. I think in Sketch you can kind of do that, where you can link things together with arrows or something. But like, I don't know. It's probably a lot of work to do that or something. I don't feel like it as built into the application as something like Facebook's Origami. And yeah, like how I got, I think, better at doing this stuff is, well, this is something I'm kind of interested in to begin with, so that kind of helps. But it just came with a lot of practice. And this really, like, learning Redux, I think, really accelerated it, because of the idea of, like, oh, if I perform a certain action, then the state needs to change a certain way. So how do I think about it from a design perspective? Like, what actions can I take? Do I click certain things? Do I press certain things? And then thinking about things from a user interface perspective, and seeing how actions can transition from one UI to another, like, that really helped me in mapping things out. Because yeah, I can't even with state machines. Like, I love them, I understand them in theory, but I can't write one from scratch. It's too hard. Does that help, Jeff?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Any other questions? Hi, Sarah. Hope you're doing well. Well, I guess if there's nothing else, oh, thank you. Hopefully this was helpful. Yeah. If there's nothing else, then I guess that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope you folks have a fantastic day. If you're watching this on YouTube later on, hope you had hopefully this was helpful. Oh, hang on. Love the accessibility concerns earlier on as well. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And just touching upon that real quick, going through that exercise, that walkthrough, it forces you, I think, as a designer, to, like, really think about those micro interactions in a very deep level. And it hopefully accessibility is a concern for you, and it's something that you're trying to get better at. And if you're going through that process with somebody who is proficient with accessibility stuff, like for me, for example, I'm not an expert. I'm aware of it. So if you're able to work with somebody who is an expert in that, then of course they can. Oh yeah, preventing difficulty in QA. Yeah. So then they can of course give their insight into how you're supposed to handle this, because other things that also cannot be well described in these diagrams is maybe certain voiceover labels need to be read to the user when they're performing certain actions that are custom, right? You can't rely necessarily on just the default HTML titles or something. Maybe certain ARIA or voiceover labels need to be spoken or hidden or something during the way. So that's really important. The other ones I think are more graphical, where it has to do with more like contrast and all those things, which I think could be taken care of without this kind of intricate walkthrough exercise. But definitely, I think voiceover support and also tab support with keyboard or mouseless interactions, those are things that are helpful when you go through that exercise. And yes, all this stuff is incredibly helpful in making sure that the QA person has a happier time when they need to do their thing. I've been involved in many kind of projects where it's a when these things aren't considered and you're the person receiving like the next phase of the work, right? Like I'm a developer and the designer's handing me stuff. It's the vibe is very much, all right, it's your turn now. My job is done, kind of thing. Like I made the mockups, you figure out how to build it. And then the developer figures out how to build it. And then it's like, all right, QA, you figure out how to, tell me what's wrong with it. But when which is not the best feeling in the world. And every time this bit gets like tossed to the next person, it gets progressively worse. The final output gets progressively worse, and the experience for that person gets progressively worse. So being able to like be thoughtful about it from the very beginning ensures that the final product is good and everyone working on it has a better time, because you just want everybody to be happy. That's how I approach things. So yeah. So thank you so much for those comments. And thank you, Jeff and Sarah, for sticking around. And I always struggle trying to figure out how to save this call. So thanks, folks. I hope you have a fantastic day. Catch you later. Bye. Stop recording. What do I press? Stop recording.